Hello, people, and welcome back to the show. It's fantastic to be back, and it's great to see all of you again. Not that I can see any of you at all, because that's not how it works. Anyway, I'm Josh, and I'm always glad to have a chat with you guys. So, today I'd like to talk a bit about perspective. It's a bit of a strange one to get into, because I said from the very start, off air, obviously, because this is the first you guys have heard of this, but I said for a long time that I want to avoid a few different topics. The one thing I really wanted to avoid in any kind of podcasting or any kind of vlogging or anything like that is politics. And I'm sticking to that too. So I'm not going to get into anything political, but this does sort of fall into the political spectrum. So you'll have to give me a bit of concession here. But what I'm sort of talking about in terms of perspective is going to sort of nest more into how our feelings develop and how being in a different place, or economically, socially, politically, you name it, depending on where you start from and where you finish in life, or how things go in terms of nooks and crannies in life that things can turn into and whatnot, how much that changes your outlook. I'll give you an example. So it's kind of funny how quickly we forget things. I'll explain a little bit more in detail about what I mean on that, but we'll loop back to it. Back when I was in just post high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I had a bit of a rough time in high school in terms of not really having any kind of direction or anything like that. I did say earlier on I wanted to be a comic book artist, but it was more of a passing sort of thing that I didn't really know how to achieve that. I didn't really have the skill set to be able to do it. But I didn't really have access to a lot of the things that would help me get to that. I know that sounds like a bit of a cop-out. In a lot of ways it is. It's sort of an excuse. I sort of justified that to myself. But my wants and things have changed as well. It didn't end up being something I wanted to pursue in the end. But I'm digressing a little bit here. But what that really comes to is I went to Tafe. So in Australia, I guess Tafe is similar to, I guess, what you would call like community college overseas. So it's like a state-funded thing. It's sort of like there's a term for it. I think they call it like pre-graduate or something. I'm probably way off base here, and I probably should have done my research. So some of you are probably groaning saying that at the minute. Anyway, that's not really relevant. But it's like a pre sort of university thing. So you can get certificates and diplomas when you go to TAFE, which there's the standard government ones, which are all subsidized and so on. Or most courses are subsidized through Centrelink, which is our welfare agency, which I was on at the time. So I had a subsidized course it was like a media course with a bit of, it was multimedia it was called. So it was a bit of like graphic design sort of stuff in there, web design, animation, film, and getting more into that sort of entertainment stuff, which I'm more into now, which is strange enough that, things loop back to that and you kind of don't expect that. For the longest time, I thought it was a waste though. The course itself kind of was a waste, but I met a lot of friends there, which was all right. But I did that course, and for that period of time in my life, I was just doing pizza delivery and I didn't have a whole lot. At one point, I didn't even have a bed. So the story with that was I lived at home with my dad at that point in time, and my brother had moved out, and he lived in a place where he lived into a friend's house, and there was already a bed there in the house, so he just used that one. So I had his bed, and I upgraded to that one, which was a double, I believe it was, double or a queen. And my bed went to the garage. Little did I know, because I hadn't been out to the garage in a long time, because we use it mostly as storage. And it turns out that Dad actually gave my bed away to my sister, which is fine, but I didn't know about this. And then one day, my brother moved into another place on his own, but there was no bed there, which meant that he had to get one, which was his bed that I was using, which meant that when he took his, which he was entitled to, I had nothing. I had no bed, and because I was working just pizza delivery and stuff, I had no income to be able to spend on anything. And it was a really difficult time because earning like basically just petrol money is it pretty much. So pizza delivery, they gave us a little bit of money for fuel, and you're kind of living off tips for the most part because the money you get paid, it's not really much. And usually you're running really short shifts too, so there'll be multiple delivery drivers on staggered shifts. So you don't always have time to really go out and work like a big 5 to 7 hour shift or whatever. You're really doing like 2 hour shifts per day, which is like nothing, and you're getting paid like $15 an hour, so you get $30, and then you might get $5 a shift for petrol, so $35 there. So you really, with the Ks that you do on your car and the wear and tear that it puts onto it in terms of tires and everything else, it's really not worth it. You're basically breaking even by the end of it. I'm sure you can make it work if you're doing other stuff as well, but that was my only job at the time because that's all I could fit in with studying. And look, it was a means to an end, and that was fine. But I remember post TAFE, I did some odd jobs here and there and a few other things, and I ended up studying nursing. And that was when I was doing a lot of study hours, like heaps and heaps and heaps. And there was a lot of outside like free time study that I had to do, and then on location study. Same with at uni, it was the same thing as well. And that was very time consuming. It's, how do I put it? It was a challenging point in time, as everyone knows who's been to uni and TAFE and all sorts of things like that. But I remember at that time I finally got through it and I finally got qualified and I got my first nursing job. But and that's when things sort of changed for me. But I want to step back to when I was studying though, because this is all about perspective. When I was studying, I remember this one time me and my friends used to go up to this place up in Melbourne. It was called Garage Cafe. You guys are probably familiar with Garage Cafe who are local to Melbourne in the car scene and whatnot. But it was a fantastic place and it just changed my life. And it was, I mentioned it in a previous podcast. So I'm not going to go into, the nitty gritty of how that all worked. But what I just find funny about it is with Garage Cafe, I remember I just couldn't afford a Coke at this one point in time. And I know that sounds like ridiculous, but I'd spend all my money on just getting up there. And I remember just this one time, a friend of mine, he bought a Coke for me, and I just didn't have the money to pay him back or anything. And I found that really challenging. That yeah, it was like a $2 Coke, but to me that was the world though. And I remember how humbling that was that he just laughed it off and said, "Yeah, it's fine." And I've told most of this anecdote before already in a previous show, but the main reason I wanted to mention it now though is where my perspective changed when I started doing nursing. When I was doing nursing, I started earning like lots and lots of money, more than I'd ever earned before, because one of the colleagues that I had there, she got very, very sick, just externally. It wasn't related to the job, but she got sick in her personal life and she had a lot of stuff going on and she couldn't work her shifts anymore, but the place was short staffed. So I worked my own shifts plus her shifts and I was just doing crazy amount of work. And I was clearing like ridiculous amounts of money, but it's kind of interesting to me just how much I forgot where I came from. This guy who used to work pizza delivery and was sleeping on an arrangement of cushions because he had no bed, to suddenly and like not being able to afford a Coke at a service station, to just suddenly being a guy who can just lash out and buy a set of a couple of grand's worth of wheels for his car one week and just be like, "Yep, done." Turbocharged it, did all these different things, bought myself another car, bought myself a Civic as a daily, an ED Civic, which is a fantastic little car, and I've bought some work wheels for it and lowered it and did all sorts of little things, and I loved it. And look, I've got no regrets with any of that stuff because it's my money that I earned and I threw it at what I wanted to. But what changed along there was how my opinions changed on things. And I didn't notice it at the time, but I only realized later on. I got really heavily into politics at that point in time of my life. And I'm not going to say like what was going on politically in the world or anything like that because it's not relevant. But what is relevant is how hardline a lot of my opinions were, and so much of them were based on the fact that I was able to, this narcissism in, I can do this, I was able to go from being broke to having money and being able to throw it at whatever I want to. And it changed the way I saw things like homeless people and how I saw people financially struggling. And it gave me this really skewed perspective based on just my personal experiences. But it wasn't reality. It didn't reflect what was actually going on in the world. And I was unable to empathize with any of these things until much later on when my circumstances changed again. I've been through quite a few jobs since nursing and I'm getting back into it now, which is kind of weird. I never thought I would say that again, but hopefully I'll be getting back into disability work, so that'll be a strange thing to get back into for me. But it's just it's really odd to me though how much that my opinion had changed back then, and then I went through several different careers, and I started working with people when I worked for an electricity company, and I started chatting to people who really were financially in hardship, who really were struggling, and then I spent some time with my father as well, who works for a organization that helps out people who who do need help in our community, people who are struggling and people who aren't really, like an outreach program. And I just, I guess for me, it took a long time to really hit that different people start from different places. It's that idea that we all have, to a degree, equal opportunity to achieve, whatever goal it is we want to achieve. And we all have those opportunities available to us. But opportunity doesn't mean accessible though. And there's a big difference there. There's a fine line right between those two things. Give an example. So a lot of my friends they've they've met a partner and they've both worked full time and they've worked really hard, and I'm never going to take that away from them. And they've been able to pool their resources to buy a house, or sometimes in some cases multiple houses, and do all these different things, or go on holidays and whatnot. And that's fine, and that's fantastic that people can do that. But there's other people out there who don't have that same access to those things because of different circumstances that they're in. They've got, say, children. They're a single parent, or they look after someone who's got a disability. And there's all these different things, or they might have a child with a disability. And as a result, they may not have, or they might have a disability. And as a result, they don't have the time that they can put into that full-time work, or they might live with dependents that they've got to, like they might earn, the $1,000 a week or whatever it might be, but their cost of living might be extraordinarily high because they've got to pay for special education programs or whatnot for their child, or they might have different things that aren't government subsidized because their illness might not actually be covered or might not be recognized by our welfare services in Australia. So it becomes really challenging then for those people to achieve the same thing. So they don't have the capacity, even though they have the same opportunities given to them, they don't have that same capacity to access it. And it's just so staggering that, when I think about how I felt, I feel guilty in a lot of ways because I had a lot of these hardline opinions that I feel horrified now thinking back to. And I guess this kind of comes back to something I mentioned in the last episode. You're at no obligation to be the same person you were yesterday. And I think that's a really strong message to have, that sometimes we say horrible things, sometimes we think horrible things, and perspective changes that. The way that we view the world changes. Everything changes along with that, and our values can change as well. Everything is fluid, and it's all ready to be. It's nothing is ever finite. Nothing is ever hard line. Nothing is ever certain. And the way you feel about something right now isn't necessarily the way you're going to feel about it tomorrow or the next day, and you're at no obligation to be locked into that. So I think that's a powerful thing that's really changed a lot of my perspective as well. And look, it did take a while to really come to terms with that too, having to sort of leave behind a lot of things. It's similar to what I've also said in another show as well. Really challenging yourself and asking, what is it that I believe in and why do I believe in that? And I found that, like, from a political point of view, it's kind of funny because I said that I didn't want to bring politics into this, and look, I'm not. But I remember this point in time where it was a perfect day, and I was peak into politics at this moment, and it was a pivotal point where I changed in terms of sort of unsubscribing from that entire world as well. I used to be avid on it, always reading all sorts of news articles, always constantly reading things I disagreed with to try and broaden my perspective. And I think that's healthy to do that, but it's got to be for the right reasons. It's not to fuel an agenda or anything like that. I'm not saying that that's what I was doing, but everyone has a bias inside. But I remember I was riding home and it was this perfect day. It was like 30 degrees. There was no wind. And for whatever reason, I think it was during probably daylight savings. And for whatever reason, I knocked off work at like 6:30 or something. And there was just no traffic in sight. It might even been 7 p.m. And it was just that perfect magic hour right before sunset where you've got that beautiful glow in the sky. And I was just cruising home and everything was perfect. It was a perfect day. And I had my visor open at like 70 Ks and there was just no wind or anything. And it was just nice, beautiful, warm air coming through. And I realized something. This is what I love. This is what I care about. I want more of this in my life. I want to live my life more about experiences. And I want to experience more of this. I don't want to live my life one opinion at a time. I don't want to live my life arguing or being in an argument or being angry about things or having anxiety because of some way that there's a political shift happening here or this new scandals happened when none of it affects me. I didn't care about any of it. And that was the first day I think I really sort of took on that mindset of, okay, well, what is it that I care about? Why do I care about this? And what do I believe in? So that was a big thing. I care about motorbikes. I care about being out in the open. I care about people. I care about relationships and talking to people. I care about games and film and media. Speaking of film, actually, I was having a discussion the other day and I thought this was really interesting. This idea of ironic filmmaking. Now I'm going to put it out there that I love B grade movies. I love movies where there's a sense of someone's had a vision, a really clear vision, and they've wanted to create something, but for whatever reason, maybe they've just not had the skill set to be able to execute it the way that they could have, or they didn't have enough education in terms of how film works, or they don't understand editing, or they just don't get sound design, or there's just some element there that they just don't understand, but they're passionate about it. And you can really see and feel that passion through their work too. But just for whatever reason, when it comes out, the execution's just slightly off. But I always find it endearing because I can see through that. And I love that there's something kind of quaint about it when you watch it and you think, oh, they tried. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean, they tried, and it makes me happy that someone gave something a go and they said, you know what? I don't care what other people think. I'm going to make my film. I'm going to make my mark, and this is my passion project. I'm going to do it. So, darn it, this is what I'm going to do with my life, and they did it. And I think, you know what? That's brave. There's something really, really brave about that. And that's why I find hopelessly endearing about it. But that brings me to something I don't like at all. It actually really annoys me too. You see company, like I don't like naming companies and these kind of things, but for sake of example, you look at say like Asylum Films who brought you films like Sharknado and so on. I think there's almost a level of pretentiousness or narcissism that comes into that, very egotistical. This idea that it's a sense like an ironic filmmaking endeavor. Yeah, some of them are like almost like a gotcha type thing to sort of trick your granddad into going and buying like Transmorphers that looks almost like Transformers cover. It's close enough. And yeah, to a degree I find that kind of funny, but that's not really what I'm getting at. What I'm getting more into is this idea that instead of leading by example and letting the body of your work speak for what you believe a good film is, there's a very fine line between that and pointing the finger and laughing at someone else, because that's how I feel those films come off, and that's why I think they're pretentious, because it's almost like almost like very hyper edgy to say, "Oh, look, I'm deliberately making a bad film," because I think films are art, and making artwork to take the piss out of other artwork that was made sincerely, I find that horrible. It's the equivalent of like a kid drawing a picture in primary school and then putting it up on the fridge, and then like their dad the next day drawing a crappy picture to take the piss out of their child, and the irony in it makes it funny, like, oh, look at this, it's basically a child's drawing, ha ha ha, children are so crap at art. And I don't know, there's two reasons I don't like it. One is that because I think it's almost offensive. But the second thing I don't like about it, though, is nobody wants to see a bad movie. Maybe there's people who do want to see a bad movie, and look, I'm probably off base there too. But I don't think that people really want to see a film that's bad, even if it's intentionally made to be bad. I just think, what are you doing? This is, I don't know, like judging art's difficult, but, and I guess that kind of leads into what's an accepted good way to do things. Because I see that in the music world a lot too. For instance, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in singing, there's almost like an accepted style of voice, especially for like men as well. This idea that there's like a universal accent that you have when you're singing. And I get it, especially from a learning point of view. Before you start introducing your own style, you've got to learn, like if you're painting, you've got to learn anatomy first. You've got to learn by the books, and you've got to learn the fundamentals of drawing before you can make your own style. Because if you don't have that building block there and you don't have that background, then really it's not really going to come together with that sense of cohesion that you normally would. Because you can tell when an artist understands what they're doing and then does something different versus someone who doesn't know what they're doing and they're just trying to do something different. Because they don't know what works and what doesn't. So there's a lot to be said for that. But there is, if you look at trends as well with music, you'll notice that there is like a very almost generational sound that each era kind of has. You look back into the 90s, and I'm not here to throw shade, as y'all young kids like to say, um, at other artists or anything like that, but I remember there was that like Tony Childs type voice where women would kind of have, like, it was really big in female singers, where they would always have that sort of throaty kind of sound where they kind of sing from back here, which I don't know, that's probably going to sound horrible and not even close to how they sound, but but something along those lines. And then like you got out of the 90s, and men had it too, where everyone sounded like Eddie Vedder as well, and they all had this southern drawl for some reason, despite not even being southern, half of them. Like um like oh, what's that fella's name who did that Glycerin song? Dude's English and still had that southern voice, which is very strange. But I mean, it's style, and yeah, I get it. But it's weird how things become almost like accepted styles that you have to sing within a certain, or compose music in a certain way to be like this is how marketable music is. And it feels very product driven. And I don't know, it's kind of sad to me. Or even in like the 2000 era, and there became that sort of harsh singing that kind of came out. I don't mean like screaming or anything like that, but it's that sort of almost R&B type singing, and you would hear that quite a lot. Um, but yeah, like I don't know, I have a lot to say on that. It's similar to like how in like Australia, for instance, I can't speak for the States or anywhere else or England or anything, but I've noticed this with our newsreaders. Our newsreaders all speak exactly the same. No matter what station you go to, it's like an accepted newsreader voice, and it's different from any kind of media commentator's voice, and different from anything. And they all sound the same. So when they're speaking, They tend to over enunciate everything and speak with the placement of the sound very quite far back in their throat. And it's just really strange. I noticed that a long time ago that everyone sounds the same. Like there's this just these prerequisites that you need to sound like that, but nobody sounds like that in real life. I've literally never heard anyone sound like a newscaster in real life, which is strange. Maybe you disagree with this, maybe not. I don't know. Disagreeing actually is something that's quite popular these days, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic as well. You've probably seen this quite a lot, but you notice that contrarianism seems to be increasingly more and more popular, which is just so strange in my mindset too. Because a lot of it seems to, like, people will throw around the term like sheep and sheeple and so on and don't believe everything you read. But to me, the irony in all of this is this idea of being a contrarian is like a popular school of thought, and it's almost like that's become the crowd in itself. So people jump onto this because it's popular to be contrarian, to disagree with everything. But it's not only just following a crowd. There's another layer to this, which is even weirder. So unpacking this, I noticed that there's this second layer of it being very similar to blind faith. So instead of like blind faith, where people just believe everything that they're told without questioning, without going into anything further, and it's very ideological too, that mindset. Contrarianism is almost identical to that, except people will just blindly disagree, even when presented with facts, make a blatant disagreement with it for seemingly no reason other than to just take this moral high ground of calling other people sheep and telling people to wake up. But it reminds me a lot of, you know, when people sort of talk about their goals, and when they talk about their goals that they haven't achieved, and look, this is something to really kind of break down and say that this is something you shouldn't do, guys. If you have a goal and there's something you want to do and you haven't taken the first step, lead by example. Start just doing the goal first. Don't tell people that you're going to do something, because something psychological happens. The second that you tell people what you're going to do and this is what you're going to do, people will respond pretty much the same way. They'll say, "Oh, that sounds awesome. What a good idea. Good job, you." But what happens is that it gives you this sense of acknowledgement straight away. You've not achieved anything, but already you're getting praise for it. And it's almost like a deterrent to even going into the goal. And that's when you get a lot of these people who will just be talkers, who will just constantly, and what I mean by that is people who just tell you about what they're going to do without actually having done it. And look, we're all guilty of that on some level. I know I am. I've done that quite a bit. But I think action is far more important. And it's very similar to that contrarian mindset too. Because with a lot of that contrarianism, what people should be doing is, and this is the sad part of all of it, is deep down underneath all that ego stuff about telling people they're sheep or this or that and throwing name calling into it, which is so petty. There actually is a really strong message in there, but it's not being listened to. It's not really being unearthed because it's got all this crap just piled onto it. The message that you should be looking at is question everything. It's not about believing everything you read. Yes, that is a problem. Believing everything you read straight away, huge issue. Blind faith is not great. But so is contrarianism. Disagreeing with everything for the sake of disagreeing with it is not the same as questioning everything. Questioning everything really, what it really means is to have a reserved judgment, to not make a decision, to not believe but to not refute. It's to be on the fence until you're presented with all of the evidence, and then you can make an informed decision and let that drive the opinion. So let's say you want to be like I'm not going to start with something big like Holocaust deniers because it's horrible. But what I will get into though is say, I don't know, like COVID-19 denies. Oh no, let's go even more basic than that. Let's say gravity denying, and people saying, I don't even know if that's a real thing. That seems insane to me. but but let's say that you disagree with gravity and say it's just a theory. All right, fine. But how about go do the research first, read through equations and papers on this, start studying physics and actually go into the basics of this and understand, and then start dropping apples things. Start experimenting with that and then start testing those theories. You propose a question and then you try and break that question. That's the whole point of having a hypothesis. You present a question and then you try and break that question. That should be the real contrarianism. That should be the real way of trying to question something. If you don't believe in COVID-19 or whatever, do the research. Get out there and actually study and then find out. If you don't believe in whatever this ideology is that you're following, go for it and question it to your heart's content. But then after you've questioned it, let that question simmer and then use the evidence to be able to build your case on what you think that is going to be. Because otherwise, it seems like you're just letting fear seemingly follow letting fear be the thing that defines your judgment. Because that seems to be a lot of it. There's a lot of this fear, and I don't mean fear of the pandemic. I mean fear of judgment for being someone who believes, because maybe in their social group they're afraid that people will judge them because there's other people who don't believe in this virus, or don't believe in whatever it might be. So they adopt this almost inverse blind faith. But fear is not bad in itself anyway, though. I'm still scared. I'm scared of a lot of things. Yes, there's things that are appropriate to be scared of. I'm not talking about I'm afraid of bears, but I live in suburban Victoria in Australia, which is ridiculous. There's no bears here. That's a phobia. That's a whole different story. But it's good to have fears of things that keep you alive. For instance, with motorcycles, I'm still afraid. I know that sounds ridiculous. I've been riding for like 5 years or whatever, and I've had multiple different bikes. But part of me still gets, there's still, it's not fear as in this fear that traps me into being terrified of going out and I'm too scared to go riding, or I target fixate on things because I'm scared, but it's this more deep fear that's right in the back of my mind that I'm consciously aware of how dangerous this is, and I'm always looking around. I got hit by a car once and broke my leg. It wasn't fun. Hurt a lot. It was a drunk driver and she was .09. It's just double our legal limit pretty much. Hit me pretty hard. So she hit me from behind, rear-ended me, and my bike landed on top of my leg and broke my leg, and I slid for, I don't know, 50 meters or something. It was a pretty traumatic experience. For a long time, I'd wake up every time, or not even wake up, I'd close my eyes to go to bed, and every time I'd start to drift off, it was just that moment before impact again, and I just blink my eyes open, and my heart would be racing, and it was like I was there again. And look, I don't want that to happen again, but I'm cautious now. Yeah, that terrifies me that something like that might happen again. And look, it might. That's why I'm constantly checking my mirrors, non-stop. I'm not putting myself in harm's way. I'm keeping as far away from cars as possible. If I can lane filter to get away from cars, I will do it. If I can put myself in a position where I'm furthest away from any car, if I'm in front so there's no one behind me, I'm getting as much distance from them as possible. And I think preventative riding like that is great. And it's not about me being in the right or being in the wrong. Now, that's actually the second time I've been hit by a car, strangely enough. The first time I got hit by a car was at low speed, and she clipped me when I was going around a corner because she didn't believe in lane filtering. And on the surface, yeah, it was her fault because she shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have road rage. But the reality is it was my fault because I should have put more distance between me and her. Because at the end of the day, like legally, it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. Some of you guys will probably disagree with this, but there's a lot of people who were correct, who were right about what, their argument was, who are in the ground. Right and wrong doesn't matter if you're dead. And that's why it's good to have that fear. And fear is probably, look, not even the right word. It's probably more, it's good to be constantly aware, to not live in your own head. And look, that's something I'm guilty of too. I don't know if any of you guys have felt this, but have you ever wanted to do something and you're passionate about it? You want to go drive your car, go ride your bike, draw a picture, watch a movie, play a video game. You want to make something for lunch. You want to go visit someone, but then you don't. You sit there and you plan and you think about every road that you're going to take. You think about every line that you're going to put on canvas. You think about every step of turning on your media device to try and put the movie on, scrolling through it, and you've planned all of this and you've gone through every step so meticulously that you just don't feel like you want to do it anymore, and you just feel like the passion's gone. Because I've felt like that, and it's a horrible feeling. So what I've started to do is actually just do things by action, to let the action drive it, and just take the first step. That's all you need to do. You just need to take step one. So for me with writing, often there's been many, many times where I've thought, oh, it's a beautiful day outside, I'll go for a ride. And I start thinking about where will I go for a ride? And I think about every road that goes to that location. I imagine how long I'm spending at the stop signs and at the traffic lights. I think about all of the lane filtering I do, and I'm playing this out in my head like this long film, and it goes forever. But by the end of it, I feel like I'm mentally fatigued that I don't want to do it anymore. And it's sad because it's like I've already experienced it. So instead, what I do now, if I feel like I want to go, I'll go straight to the cupboard where my gear is, start putting my jacket on and my jeans and my boots and my gloves and my helmet, all that kind of stuff. And by that point, I grab my keys. I'm already geared up. I've already got my keys in my hand. I've taken that first step. So you know what my next step is? It's not going for a ride. It's going to the garage. Just one step at a time. And then by the time I get to the garage, well, I'm already at my bike and I'm already here. The garage is already open. All I have to do is wheel it out. And that's what I do. And then close the garage and then suddenly I'm riding. And that's as simple as that. You know, planning is good. Planning can be fantastic. Can it be beneficial too? But the reality is, if you plan every single step so meticulously like that, you'll never do anything because action is the most valuable part of it. You got to take action. So what I'd like to know is I would love to know what projects you guys are working on and what problems you've got that you're stuck in that you want to take action but you haven't, or things that you felt guilty about not doing. I want to know more about those things because I find them interesting. And being passionate about projects myself, I don't know if I can give you advice on them or anything like that, but I just think it's always great, and I'd love to hear more about that kind of stuff because I've had my fair share of projects and things like that, and like I said, I've owned my fair share of things like motorbikes and whatnot. Actually, I remember my first bike. It was a Kawasaki ZXR 250C. If any of you guys know what that is, it's very similar to Honda's MC22, which is a CBR 250RR for those who don't know. There's a little inline four 250cc or 249cc or whatever it is, four-cylinder little sport bike that they look like a full-size super bike. It looks pretty much like a ZXR 400, which is modeled very closely off the ZXR 750. Likewise, the CBR was very similar to, it was like a baby version of the CBR 900 Fireblade. And absolutely fantastic little bike, that 250. But here's the thing. For a new rider coming into bikes, would I recommend it? I actually wouldn't, to be honest. It's kind of funny because I even sold that to a friend as a first bike. And I think it is a fantastic bike. They're super fun and great. But they're not necessarily easy to ride. And I think that what you really want, and what I'd recommend to most learners nowadays, is get something that's got torque in it so you can overtake, that doesn't require you to constantly be downshifting and revving its head off or anything like that. But don't get something big and over the top powerful. Something like a CBR 500 or a CB 500. And I think getting something more naked rather than a sports bike would be where I'd go with it too. And this is coming from me, who's owned nothing but sport bikes. I've owned the ZXR, which is a proper like little mini super sport. I had a CBR 600RR, and now I've got a Fireblade currently. But would I buy one again? Definitely not. I think what I recommend to people as a first bike though would be something that's like an SV 650 or a CB 500, something that's naked, a lot of bottom end torque, but not much power. It's not going to be something that's going to get you into a crazy amount of trouble or anything like that. It's just good on a motorway. It's a good all-rounder. But most importantly, and this is the most important part of it, it has to be easy to ride and confidence inspiring. Because when you're starting out, forget about getting your dream bike first off, because everything changes once you start riding. What starts off as what you think you might want isn't necessarily what you might want down the line. So I think get something like that, or like a GS 500. The reason I'm naming cheap bikes as well is because everyone drops bikes. I know there's some of you out there who probably haven't, and that's awesome. I've dropped bikes. It happens. It sucks, but it's not the end of the world. And when you're starting out, dumb things happen. You might pull up to an intersection and a car pulls out and you panic and hit the brakes and you drop the bike. Or it might be you're heading down a gutter and the ground is further away from you than you thought and you misjudged it. And you go to put your foot down, the ground's not there, and you drop your bike. There are a number of different reasons you drop your bike. Or you can be like me and do the dumbest one of all, pull up at the shops, sit on your bike for a second and think, yeah, all right, it's time to get off. Get off your bike. Whoops, forgot to put the side stand down. Bike straight into the ground. These things happen, but they're meant to, you know? Bikes are on two wheels, they're not a car. They're meant to lean over, and sadly, they are fragile little beasts too. So you will drop them. These things happen. It's not the end of the world. But I'd say get a cheap bike that's got a bit of displacement in it, that's easy to ride and confidence inspiring. And this is what I mentioned before as well, that your tastes are going to change. So when it comes down to buying your gear as well, I'm a huge advocate of all the gear all the time. If you don't want to wear all the gear, that's fine. That's on you. It's personal accountability. It's your responsibility to make sure that you dress appropriate for the ride. And if you don't want to do that, then that's on you. But the reality is you're the only one that you're hurting. So just keep that in mind. But with gear though, I would say my personal take on it, get all the gear. Most motorcycle injuries are going to be below knee. Leg breaks are the most prevalent. So get yourself some good boots. I've seen a few different types of boots that are great out there. For instance, getting adventure type boots, probably a good idea early on. Just get full length boots though is what I recommend. The next thing I'd recommend too is obviously a helmet. It's mandatory in most places in the world. Get yourself a decent-ish helmet, but it's okay to start cheap, but get a full-faced helmet though. The reason I say start cheap on these things is because I remember I got kitted out and I had a leather jacket and helmet and jeans and all these different things. And I had it all like what I thought was great and what I thought would be the final gear I would ever own. And I'd keep it until my helmet got, 3 years old or 5 years old and replace that with a new one and whatnot. And then suddenly I didn't really want any of it. I didn't like how my gear looked. I didn't like the style of it or anything. And that happened within about a year of riding. Because the more I got into the culture of riding and the more I got into what it's like to own a motorcycle and all of that, I realized that what I wanted kind of changed too. And I didn't really care for half this stuff. So it's just a peace of mind to think about. But anyway, I hope you guys had a fantastic listen along the way. I had fun having a chat with you. So I'll hear from you guys next week. And feel free to comment below. Like I said, I would love to hear about what those projects are and what you've got going on. And if there's anything else that you guys wanted to have a chat about or anything you wanted me to expand on or go into a little bit further, definitely leave it below and we'll have another chat. See you later.